One of these clips was filmed on the DJI O3 and the other was filmed on Walksnail's new 4K FPV camera. Can you tell which is which? In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Walksnail's new Avatar Moonlight 4K kit, and to put it to the ultimate test, I'm going to be putting it side by side against an O3 Air unit on one of my FPV drones. So in the box you get the camera already connected to the VTX unit, you get two antennas that I have already connected, you get a bag of mounting screws, some cables, and a user manual. In my hand it feels like it weighs pretty much the same, maybe a little bit more. It's definitely a bigger unit, so let's put this on the scale real quick and just get this out of the way. An O3 Air unit with the antenna and camera connected weighs 39 grams. And then the new Walksnail Moonlight kit with the antennas connected and the camera is 47 grams. Now we do also have an ND filter on this camera, so we can remove that. And this ND filter alone weighs, what, 4 grams? So if you didn't want to use an ND filter, that'll bring it down to 44 grams. So comparing the two, the Moonlight has a 160-degree field of view compared to the O3's 155-degree field of view. So the Moonlight is a slightly wider lens. It also has an f2.1 aperture compared to the O3 that has f2.8. Might not sound like much, but the aperture will probably make the Moonlight better in low light than the O3 is. The O3 does really struggle in low light, so I'm excited to see how this one performs. Both cameras have built-in stabilization as well as the ability to use gyro flow for post-stabilization. Personally, I always use gyro flow, so I'm going to be using gyro flow when comparing these two. One thing that I noticed on the Moonlight camera is that it has rubberized grommets in the camera itself, so this will hopefully dampen any vibrations that could make their way into the gyro data. This can be a real issue with O3 footage, and the O3 does usually need some pretty solid vibration dampening to eliminate the micro vibrations that you see in the footage. Since this isn't built into the camera like the Moonlight, usually this is something that's integrated into the drone. Having the vibration dampening built right into the camera could make this a little more compatible with other frames that aren't necessarily compatible with the O3 because of the vibration dampening. So this is a pretty unique feature. I'm curious to see if this makes a big difference. I'm going to focus on the Moonlight right now, but the camera is connected via a coaxial cable that is, I'm pretty sure, the exact same length as the O3 that I have. Yeah, that's the exact same length. To remove the camera cable, all you do is loosen these two nuts right here. We have a cover that's kind of protecting that coaxial connector. You remove this cover and then you'll have easy access to pull this cable off if you need to replace it. This is technically the top of the VTX. If we flip it over, you can see additional mounting points. So we have the 25 by 25, and those are the screws that we saw on this side. Those are 25 by 25. And then on this side, we have 25 by 25, but then in the middle, we have 20 by 20, and these are threaded. So you can take some M2 screws, and when you're mounting this on your frame, if your frame has 20 by 20 mounting, you can just put some M2 screws through the frame and directly into the video transmitter. On the back side, we have where our antennas connect, and this gets me to my first complaint with this unit. We have our antenna connectors in here, and they are facing up like that to access it. You have two tiny little screws right here. You basically take those out, and this entire cover comes off. Getting these antennas connected is pretty difficult. You kind of have to get like a flathead screwdriver and put it in there and twist it to kind of click it down into place. And I'm not really a fan of sticking screwdrivers in components like this, and it's just a little difficult to get the antennas in there. On the left hand side here, we have our main power port. This unit accepts 6 volts to 25.2 volts, so 2 to 6 as voltage input. In addition to the port, you have 2 pads that you can solder directly to if you wanted to. You've got RX and TX pads right next to that plug. Alongside, we have our bind button right here, so that's how we're going to bind this with our Goggles X. And above that, we have 2 LEDs, one that indicates the binding status and another LED that will tell us the recording status. On the opposite side here, we have our micro SD card slot. The VTX doesn't have any built-in memory storage, so you will need to use an SD card with this. And then we have 2 additional plugs, and these plugs are mainly just for firmware updates. So the way that this unit works is there's 2 boards in here. The top one is for the DVR, and then the bottom one is for the video transmitter. When you're installing an update, you pretty much put the update on an SD card, you put it in there, connect the 2 boards, and then it'll update both boards. So that's what these two plugs are for. Taking a look at the camera, we have a little protector on here. I'm just gonna take that off. Actually, I'm gonna take this ND filter off. This thing just slides on and it actually kind of protects the camera. It's a unique design, but this is an ND8 and this is included with the camera. So I'm really excited to see how this thing stacks up against the O3 Air unit, and I have the perfect setup to put it head to head with the O3. This is Beta FPV's Pavo 35. This is a 3.5-inch 6S Cinewhoop that has some solid power and is really meant for the O3 Air unit. So I actually plan on mounting my O3 Air unit in this all-in-one case. This is a all-in-one case that I printed that has the O3 Air unit, O3 camera, and an antenna, and then a little balance lead power plug attached to it. I'm gonna be mounting this to the GoPro mount up here, and then I'm gonna install the Moonlight as the primary VTX in this drone. So before we hop outside and put the O3 head to head with the Moonlight, let's install this on a drone. We'll go through some settings, and then we'll take it outside and put it to the test. Hopping into the settings, we'll start with the general settings that you have right on this screen. We've got up to 700 milliwatts of transmit power. Resolution goes up to 1080p. I'm recording this on Orcas, so I can't go up to 1080p. Bitrate, standard and high. Frame rate, you have standard and high. If you have a high frame rate, you won't be able to film in 4K. You can only film in 1080. And then we have all the other standard settings right there. Hop over to the camera settings. We have day, night, and race modes. We have an EV setting. Camera saturation, this goes down to 1 and up to 10. I just keep this at 5. Same with sharpness. Sharpness is the same numbers. White balance, I would keep this fixed. I'll explain that in a little bit. But you have 4,000 to 7,000. We have the aspect ratio, 16:9 and 4:3. I would just keep this in 16:9. I will also explain this in a little bit. 3D dynamic range, shutter speed, auto, and this ranges from 1/8000 to 1/60th, and then max ISO goes from 100 to 51,200. Record set, now this is where you would change the video quality. We have 4K 30, 2.7K 60 FPS, 2.7K 30 FPS, 1080 60, 720 60, and that's it. So if you notice, the built-in image stabilization right there is off and it's blurred out. So if we change this to 2.7K, that's actually going to make it so we can turn on the built-in image stabilization. You can't get image stabilization if you're in 4K, so it will just turn that off if you choose to film in 4K. Record device, takeoff, record, record loop, format SD card, format VTX, all this good stuff. Now we have the color drop down, and there's actually no other options other than standard, so you're stuck recording in standard. I'm sure Walksnail will have an update that has a flat color profile, hopefully. Okay, so now I'll hop over to some flight footage. To start this off, when I'm doing a comparison video like this, I like showing you guys both side by side without any labeling, so you can form an unbiased opinion on which one you think actually looks better. I did a handful of flights, all in 4K 60 FPS, except for when I was testing out the internal stabilization, but all of the comparison footage between the O3 and the Walksnail Moonlight are in 4K 60 FPS with matching camera settings to make this as fair as possible. The aspect ratio was 16:9 and a 4500 to 5500 locked white balance. I didn't use an ND filter on either camera when I was doing these tests, but if you have a fixed shutter speed, having an ND filter will give you more cinematic looking results. Both of my cameras were on auto shutter. When we go through this comparison, I'm mainly going to focus on the 4K image that is recorded to the video transmitter itself. In this section, I won't be talking about the video that I see in the goggles. So on the Walksnail Moonlight, we have no control over the color of the video other than the white balance. There is a color drop-down menu, but we don't have a flat profile or anything comparable to DJI's D-Cine-like profile. Since both cameras were on auto shutter, I wanted to test out how the cameras adjust from exterior lighting to interior lighting. The DJI is pretty smooth and consistent, whereas on the Moonlight, the adjustments are more noticeable and they're kind of like notchy. Something that I need to mention is the white balance. I ended up locking the white balance on the O3 and the Moonlight because after one test on auto, when indoors, the Moonlight was snapping back and forth from cool to warm crazy fast. I noticed this in my goggles while I was flying, and I was hoping that it wasn't going to be reflected in the 4K footage, but unfortunately it was. This made the footage just completely unusable, unfortunately, so I would recommend locking your white balance to prevent this from happening, especially if you're doing interior fly-through work where lighting can change from room to room. Sharpness wise, it actually looks like there might be a little more detail in the Moonlight than the O3. I have always felt like the 4K footage on the O3 was lacking. I've never been able to get a sharp looking image out of the 4K. On the Moonlight, you can see more detail in little things like the lines on the couch here, or even when we're outside flying through the trees. To me, the most noticeable difference is when we're outside. The Moonlight overexposes the image overall and is most noticeable in the sky. In the footage flying over the football field, the image levels out because most of the video is really bright. When I fly down near the trees where there's less snow, the image does get brighter and the sky gets way overexposed. We don't have any detail up in the sky to pull from this. Whereas on the O3, those same parts are bright, but you do have data in there, and if you bring the highlights down, you can actually get some detail out of the sky like this. Aspect ratios. I was excited to see that the Walksnail had a 4:3 option in the camera settings, but that 4:3 actually doesn't translate to a taller 4K image for better stabilization. So I'm pretty sure that all filming modes will just be 16:9 regardless of what you see in the goggles, unfortunately. For me personally, this is my biggest request for this camera and the O3. 4K 4:3. That's all I want. When you have a 4:3 image, you typically will have more in the frame, and when it comes time to stabilize that footage in gyroflow or real steady, you'll have more image to work with, and that's gonna give you a smoother result. On my O3 cameras, I always keep them in 2.7K 4:3 because there is no 4K 4:3. Plus, oddly enough, on the O3, I feel like I actually get a sharper image out of 2.7K than I do with 4K. Also, something worth noting, the 4:3 crop that you see in the goggles on the Moonlight actually shows less image than the 16:9. On the O3, you see more image in 4:3 than you do with 16:9 because it gives you that additional height. So just keep the Moonlight in 16:9. There's really no benefit from what I can see to having the 4:3 option. Last thing we're going to take a look at is the nighttime capabilities of the Moonlight. It's called the Moonlight, so I had to do a test at night. The Moonlight very clearly outperforms the O3. The O3 is really bad in low light, even with a maxed out ISO. Now, even though the Moonlight performs better than the O3 in low light, the 4K image you get out of the camera, in my opinion, isn't really usable for much since it's so grainy. Now, on the video transmission side of things, I had awesome performance with the Walksnail on 700 milliwatts in 1080p. It really felt comparable to DJI O3 video quality wise and penetration wise. In my testing, I was just doing stuff on my Cinewhoops, and I'm not doing crazy acrobatic freestyle moves to really notice any latency. So to wrap up this video, the Walksnail Moonlight is the closest thing that we have to O3. I was pretty pumped for Walksnail to send me this because I would love to see them put something out that is better than DJI equipment. They're honestly so close with this, and hopefully with some firmware updates we can get more image control, like a flat color profile. A 4:3 aspect ratio would be awesome, even if it's just in 2.7K like the O3 is. They really need to improve the auto white balance because in certain situations that's just unusable and just ruins the footage. I feel like these are all things that they could eventually work out in future firmware releases. So if you have a set of Walksnail goggles or even their VRX module and have been waiting for something comparable to DJI's O3, I'd say this is it. I have high hopes for Caddx or Walksnail getting to DJI's level, and I really feel like they're getting close. So if this video helped you out, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more FPV content, leave this video a like, and if you have any questions about the new Walksnail Moonlight 4K kit, leave a comment down below.